look in Exodus when Moses is up on the Sinai, he didn't just get these tablets, he got the directions to the temple.
Greetings and welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I am Brandon Spain, your host on this journey through the mysterious, the unexplained, and the supernatural, all viewed through the lens of biblical truth. Connect with us and gain access to exclusive content at unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, for this week's episode. All right, you guys. I'm stoked to introduce today's co-host. He's a creative powerhouse with over 2 decades of experience in storytelling, design, and immersive media. A deep thinker whose curiosity stretches from user experience to the unexplained. His perspective is grounded, imaginative, and just the right amount of fringe. That's exactly why he's the perfect voice for today's conversation at the edge of belief, mystery, and meaning. And he's also the genius behind our logo and the epic Unrefined merch. And he's my brother-in-law. So I welcome Ron to the show. Thanks for being here, Ron.
Thanks for having me.
Our guest today is not just an artist, but a spiritual archaeologist of the weird and wild corners of Scripture. Known for his ability to fuse art, scripture, and historical inquiry, he blends deep biblical research with creative insight, and his latest work dives headfirst into the forgotten warriors who stood with David, the mighty men of old. His writings challenge the sanitized Sunday school versions and reveal a gritty, kingdom-building brotherhood with prophetic resonance for our times. Welcome to the show, Adam Farris.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I just want to do the first pitch and hit this one out, and then we can dive into other stuff. Want to know a little bit more about you and how you got into this. So you're known for your creative work as an artist, but what sparked the overlap between your art and the layers of biblical fringe topics that we're talking about today? How'd you get into all this?
Yeah, absolutely. Adam Farris, writer. I love the spiritual architect. That's awesome. 3 years ago, I was just a distribution center manager. I was a tire facility manager. It's where I was. That was my career. And I was trying to figure out what my next step was. I was super kind of burnt out of what I was doing. I was getting bored, and the job was more stressful than it needed to be, and yada, 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 yada. Well, while I was in my little, who am I? My father passed. And unexpectedly, 63.
That's young.
Yes, young age. And through those couple of months and all of everything that came with it, I ultimately got a calling to essentially share the good news, to put a better perspective, a better visual to Bible stories kind of thing. It was really 3 years has just been developing. Again, it started with just Five Stones, a really gritty take on the David and Goliath story. And while I was doing the research to answer your question, um, I was focused on putting the book out, but as I was learning just my own walk with God, I was noticing different things in the Bible and different patterns, and I was kind of attacking it the way I would do in distribution. I really like root cause analysis. I feel like that's what I'm really good at and why I stayed for so long. So I'm reading the Bible and I'm just noticing stuff. So I started a blog just because I wanted to talk about it and keep the graphic novel for what it is. So a year and a half, 2 years into it, I noticed my own pattern that I'm talking a lot about David's mighty men, finding more giants and hybrids and stuff. So then that's when it kind of clicked of why it was David and Goliath. Because through the 3 years, I'm learning myself what this thing's about. And, I had my own questions like, why am I writing this one book? I feel like that was a great segue into all this other stuff because it is absolutely all around David. It's more in the Bible, but it's extremely around David. So that's just how I kind of got into it. And once I noticed it, I just super dove down. It was like, okay, I get it. This is what you want me to do. Because this is a led thing. This isn't Adam wanting to start a business. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
This is just research and explain, research and share. And yeah, in a nutshell, that's how I got into all the extra stuff was just I just found myself in it.
Yeah, I think that's great that you're researching and really diving down and digging in because our circles, the friend circles, giants are pretty out there and pretty prevalent. But your take is just incredibly different, And I was thinking something. You were talking about David, and you were talking about it comes back to David and Goliath, and then it just hit me that, David in the Old Testament, we do a Bible study on Sundays where we ask questions of the scriptures that we're in. And one of the questions when we're in the Old Testament is we ask, so how is this a type of Christ? And David is, to me, the penultimate type of Christ in the Old Testament. So let's just kind of go really deep here. So how do you think David and all this stuff that we're talking about relates to Jesus and the bigger picture?
Yeah, so and it's a great question because you do notice that there's a lot of reoccurrences,
Yeah,
like
patterns.
the yes, the apple, the tree, and then the cross, the tree. It's just the whole Bible is a crazy parable. And that's what's been really fun to me is just diving into in because it is not face value by any stretch. But so David, no one was interested in him. He was cast aside. He was not looked at as beneficial in any stretch. When Samuel the seer came to see Jesse and his household, he wasn't even invited in initially.
Mm,
That's huge because, at those times there was no movie stars, there was no like the seer, the prophet, that was the guy of
yeah.
the town, and the prophet, the seer came to see you. And it's like, don't you have more kids? Oh yeah, 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 yeah. The last one's out there with the sheep. So his entire life's like that. And then when you look at the building of the mighty men are they're cut right to it. Their bloodlines are Nephilim from different branches and different genealogy, but that's where it all comes from. So if you get out of the supernatural and just look factual, they're the bad guys, they're the sinners, they're the lost sheep kind of thing.
Yeah.
David, that's the only thing that David gets along with, and that's the only form of person or life that accepts him for who he is, with no judgment whatsoever. So you kind of start to see these synopses. It's very close to how people look at Jesus, and so yeah, I would say definitely that he was super cast aside and was never appreciated for what he actually brought. It is really interesting that when it gets right down to it, he didn't get to build the temple. Solomon did because
Mm,
he had the war in his heart. Now, I suggest that that wasn't like a sin thing, like he wasn't like a flawed person in that sense. That was because this has been a personal journey too, right? So
mhm.
you've got Joshua and you got Caleb. Those guys, if you go down into their stories, they probably weren't going to be the guys leading the congregation, but they were used. Moses had passed the baton to those guys, and same with David. So don't shy away from having a little grit. Sometimes you need to have a little grit. And one thing that I put in Five Stones, the first line on the inside cover is "My strength works best with your weakness."
Yeah.
Is because that's the way that God can work with us. No pride, none of that stuff in our way. And David definitely wasn't like that.
Well, and you just said it, weakness. And we always our first in our culture, probably in other cultures too, early on, is we think of strength being like physical weakness and our weakness and our strength, or what about the fact that David was the outlier king, and so therefore that was a weakness. If you look at the whole thing of he was going to become the king of Israel, but he was on the out, he was an outlier. So therefore, and the same thing with Jesus, he's the outlier king, and he will come back as the reigning king. But he was the outlier king, and definitely had our weaknesses, but was able to overcome them. So yeah, that's a great way to look at that. I've never thought about it like that. So yeah,
Oh,
cool.
yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, you want to like talk about humble, like you know what I mean? Like David,
Yeah.
I would argue that he didn't see what everybody saw in him. I would argue that. And then
Mm,
the stories, and we know the stories about when he nipped um some of Saul's clothes and was like, "See, I could have done it, but I didn't do it."
mhm.
My journey into this is like David just literally was just wanting a friend. He wanted peace. He did. I think that the chink in his armor was he liked the ladies. It had messed him up. You know what I mean? But still humble and strong, like incredible stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Ron, you want to jump in?
Yeah,
Anything
I'm going to dive in with a technical question
okay. Go
because I
for it.
think like this. So when you're doing your comic art, are you using like Bristol board and doing like a 10 by 15 work area with black magic ink or something like that, what are the work methods that you employ? Or do you go full digital? This is me approaching this from the art perspective. You probably want to cut this part out, but I'm really curious.
No, this is good. Yeah.
No, dude, this is fun. This is a great question. This is fun. Again, I'm an open dude. You hit me. So I can't draw. This is a crazy story. Let me start from the beginning. So
okay, I like where you're starting this story because this is like a really great lead into what I feel like is going to be a super awesome story. Like anybody that starts with, I make a comic book, but I can't draw. Like I'm fully invested now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Listen.
So again, I like to clarify, this is a led thing. I didn't start a business and I didn't try to just make money off a book. I just, on my mind was just David and Goliath. Through all what I said earlier, all my hard times and blah, I just was just dissecting it of what it looked like. And eventually I realized God was putting that in my heart, was like, he's telling me to write, and he was telling me David and Goliath. There was a time, everyone has their moment. So I had my moment, and I was like, man, I don't know what to do. I was born and raised Pentecostal, but I left at 17, so I have a foundation. Or I had a foundation at that time. So I said, man, I feel like you're knocking. I don't know what to do. I'm in a really hard place. I'm tapping out. I've got 4 kids. I got a beautiful wife. I need some help, and I need to make sure that they're straight. I feel like you're telling me to write a story, so I'm gonna do it. I need help. I don't know how to do that, but I'm gonna do it. I was like, yeah, I'm your man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm done. So I just initially Googled how to write a script and just played around with it. Eventually got the courage to tell my wife, hey, this is what I'm doing. And he lined up the finances for me. This was self-funded, self-published, everything. So he lined it up. So I hired an artist, and I wanted to do really punchy, like real gritty black and white Sin City style.
Yeah. I picked up on the Frank Miller, like hard contrast kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit of Frank Miller, a little bit of Mike Mignola. I see a little bit of Sam Keith in some of the shapes.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. So that was my thing, to backtrack. When I was doing it, I said, I know who I am. I know what I like. So I know you don't want me to do a kid's book. I was like, just let's do this. I'll keep going till you tell me no. So it's just like, you got me. So we got the black and white, and it didn't have the punch. And then I would have had to go back to get somebody to color and all this stuff. So far at this point, everything I told my wife, hey, I'm thinking about this, she was down. Hey, I'm thinking about this, she was down. So it goes through my head, well, you paint it, you color it. So I told my wife, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about I might color this thing. And she's like, okay, not go. So I'm laying in bed that night, and I'm like, man, what are you doing? You writing a comic book? Now you're gonna paint it? We're like, what are you doing, dude? And it was a hard moment, and I just literally was just like, make a sound. Please make a sound. Let me know I'm in the right direction. And man, I got a sound. I got a crazy. It was a trumpet. This, for reference, that's what I can use. I mean, it was pounding, and it told me, keep going. You're in the right direction. I'm gonna help you. Just keep going. So what I did was I'd just get watercolor paper, and I would have my kids draw on it, and I would practice watercoloring, because I like the aspect of watercolor, and I know you appreciate it too, because it's alive and it's organic. So I wanted a different look. So I just practiced, literally was just painting dinosaurs and playing whatever my kids would draw, and till I got comfortable enough to do it. And I would just literally print it out on 12 by 18 tape. You can see behind me, I would tape off a borderline.
Yeah.
And I would print it, and then I would paint it on the watercolor, and then rescan it in. So the entire book was like super manual. I did the lettering, everything. I found a place to print it out. Everything was super manual, other than obviously the drawing.
Yeah.
I love that.
So yeah, that's to answer your question. That's why I went with what I did and how it come out, was because he was guiding me. It was like, here, I'm gonna show you how to do it. Let's do it like this.
Yeah, he doesn't call the equip; he equips the called. So I think that's a great example of God using people who don't necessarily have a background in certain things in order to accomplish His ends. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, and you look in Exodus when Moses is up on the Sinai, He didn't just get these tablets, he got the directions to the temple. And part of my research, main part, is like reading between the lines. And I would go so far as say that that was probably extraterrestrial information he came back down with. Like he probably come back down was like, hey, look, from your elbow to the top of your fingers, how we're gonna measure it. And everything was guided. And we don't put enough emphasis on that. Cause yeah, like he probably come down and was like, hey guys, we're gonna build a temple. And they're like, all right, let's build. And they're like, all right, so we're gonna be cutting some wood. And it's like, all right, what are we gonna
Right.
cut it with? Like, all right.
Yeah, so you've got this like comic book structure and formatting that you're contending with, or looking at the Israelites and the formatting that they're contending with based on the instructions that God gave. But looking at sort of like overall narratives, do you think that the modern comic book superhero archetype with, larger than life figures with extraordinary powers, do you think they have their roots in ancient narratives based on the Nephilim?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
Yeah. That
Stan
was a very
Lee,
leading question, I'm sure, but it was very, very leading, but I wanted to see if you concurred with my take on it.
absolutely. And this is it's a complex answer from me, and most of them usually are. But if you look at everything black and white, completely, there's no coincidences, everything's meant, blah. We're on the biblical timeline, right? We're in Genesis to Revelations. And that's kind of that, right? There's no non-canonical book you can go. So that is our timeline, which would mean that we are a blip on this spiritual warfare. You know what I mean? So that means the people at the beginning are the people through the middle and then to the end. They're the same group. That's why our dollar, Federal Reserve, has an eagle. Mesopotamia, Rome, Egypt, everybody had the same logo. It's the same people. So there's going to be some form of deception. Like it's a long game, long, long, long game.
Yeah.
Stan Lee did an interview one time, and they were like, "There's a lot of just like your question. They were like, there's a lot of this from there and this and blah. Do you believe in God?" And he's like, "Ah, no, nope." He didn't just say no. I'm not really. He kind of like laughed, scoffed it off. But all of his work, everything that he ever got a dime from, was basically ripped off from that, right? The Celestials, the Eternals, Nimrod,
Yeah. Yeah.
people being taller and stronger. I mean, yes, that is clear. Same with mythology and all that stuff. So it's technically the same people pushing the same thing all the way, all the way, all
Yeah,
the way through.
through the millennia. Yeah. Okay. You're exactly on point with what I believe to be true about that as
Yeah.
well.
And something else too, I've been kind of floating on is it's a long game. Check this out. So we're now, if you stump your toe or something frustrating happens or whatever the case, 9 times out of 10, non believers or whatever the case, believers too will say JC, right? I'm not going to say it, but they say the Lord's name in vain, right?
Right.
Now look at the other side of this. We have been conditioned that if somebody's great, they're the goat. You
Yeah.
see that there?
Yeah. It's,
You know
it's
how
interesting.
when you want the cat to stop scratching at the front door, you got a spray bottle. The cat doesn't know what you're doing, but essentially it's going to associate pain with the front door. So that's another example of long game. So now we're at the point where we're using Lord's name in vain when something frustrating. When I say we, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Culturally.
Culturally, exactly. I worked with some guys one time that just kept saying that and was like, chill out. But now, if somebody's awesome, they're the goat. We're associating goat with goodness. Look at that. That's long game stuff, man.
Like
Yeah.
logos, archetypes, symbols. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing throughout the eons.
Hiding in plain sight. That's yep. So let me ask you. I'm going to do a kind of a non-technical question that I ask a lot of people when I talk about giants and deal with giants. So, how big do you think the giant? I know this is really basic, but everybody has a different opinion about it. How big do you think the giants were from your research, and why?
That I
Sure.
love this question.
Yes. And I try to attack everything real, factual.
Yeah,
I don't like to, and you can tell you've seen my stuff. I don't like to do any metaphysical, real. The only thing that we actually have is Amos 2:9, where God says the Amorites were as tall as cedar trees. Now, that's unfortunately not us size because cedar trees can be 20, 30, and then sometimes 1,000 foot tall. And then
right.
we do have plenty of reference of how important cedar trees are from Lebanon in the Bible, right? It's just
Yeah,
constantly like anytime somebody's going to build something, we got to get the cedar trees from Lebanon.
Yeah.
So that's the only concrete thing that we have for size. So I hate to
Maybe
say
Og's
minimum,
bed, right? Maybe Og's bed, 10 foot
which
by.
is exactly, which is funny too, because in translate, it's not actually a bed; it's his sarcophagus. Because you
Oh,
look
is
at
it?
yeah,
I
because
thought
if
I
you
thought it was like his love chamber. I mean, it's up there
no,
on top of
that's
the
the hard.
ziggurat where. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. No, that's the hard part with translation. Because if you notice that all the kings go to lie and sleep with their fathers,
yeah, yeah,
and it literally is just translation. Because like in Hebrew, it does say die and sarcophagus and cough and all that, but through translation, we get going to sleep, and they for whatever reason they associated death and sleep, like long sleep. Is probably how the translation goes. So yeah, that's actually his coffin is what it
okay,
is.
interesting.
But still, like he's supposed to be 13. Well, his coffin was like 13 feetish. If I don't put a lot of trust in the translation of measurement. I really don't, because I personally have seen some differences in the cubit foot of Goliath and then like temple stuff with Solomon. I don't think that we're supposed to go to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the interesting thing too about that, about in Hebrew, a lot of people don't know is there's no aspect of diameter in Hebrew language. That really cuts out a lot of different kind of stuff. I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail. So yeah, you're kind of left to our context, reading into their context, being careful not to project all of our context on there. So
It
yeah,
you know it exactly, and it's crazy because like a lot of times I would say 8 times out of 10, if you read great, they don't mean great or wealthy. They do mean it's Gadol, meaning of great size.
oh,
Like
wow,
Abram and Ishmael were promised Goy Gadals, nations of great size. Jonah was swallowed by a Dag Gadol, a fish of great size. So, and there's 3 or 4 guys I can name off right now that are named as Ishgadals. So they're men of great size. So that's the crazy part. I think personally, I mean, if I had to answer, I think that it was so like motley and so crazy that there was no standard. I think that
yeah,
we can confirm all the bad were pre-flood,
yeah, yeah. I mean,
dinosaurs and stuff.
there would be a difference between antediluvian and before the flood too. Yeah, so yeah,
Like Deuteronomy 23 says the Ammonites and the Moabites are not allowed in the temple after the 10th generation. So all that is confirming that some can be birthed out, some can't be. And then, like if you're merging with tall people anyways or smaller people. So yeah, we know that there were some tree tall people.
So I'll interject this real quick. I just looked this up. The cedars of Lebanon can grow to a height of about 130 feet, but modern specimens are about 65, which is either way, that's an astonishingly, tremendously huge height. Imagine
yes,
a 65-foot tall, imagine a 30-foot tall person.
we
So
yeah.
20 feet even.
When you see that on hieroglyphs all over the world, 30 feet.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
was getting that.
and archaeologists have that they're
We're always told this the canon of proportions according to the
right,
Egyptians
yeah,
that, we're going to depict Horus and Ra at a larger scale because they're divine or whatever.
right,
Well,
Yeah.
and to your point, there's something really interesting. The Vizier Reckmeyer, the tomb of the Reckmeyer. I'm sure you're familiar, but so to go with the proportion thing. So a vizier is the guy in charge of like the king's bidding. Sometimes they built temples and stuff like that. Well, in Reckmeyer's temple, there's a line of he essentially was over traders going and getting stuff and bringing it back for the pharaoh. All the dudes are all the same size, completely all the same size. But then they all have different animals. Like there's some guys carrying monkeys, walking monkeys. There's
Like
dudes in the
monkeys,
back
elephant.
walking an
Yeah.
elephant. There's 2 dudes walking a giraffe and stuff. So you can take up the argument, well, they're all proportionate. But if you really, really look at that picture, look at the headdress and the loincloth, all that's different. So that's the difference of the people. Because how do you write something that's going to translate, just like the Bible or anything else? So the Egyptians are known for their symmetry. So when something's off is when it's not symmetrical. So of course, all of those guys are going to be the same size when they draw them. But then again, you look at what they're wearing and what they're walking. That's the difference. So it's like, yeah, that dude is literally walking an elephant on a leash. What they were doing was going over to different lands, getting stuff, and taking it to the Pharaoh. There's examples in the Bible too of for during First Kings, Second Kings, and the Chronicles. All the different kings of Israel. There's references of going out and bringing back peacocks and apes. So everybody was doing that all over the world. They were checking the whole place out, and yeah, some big boys was bringing some big stuff back.
Yeah. Yeah, and there might be, and I believe this way about Genesis chapter 1. It might be, Heiser always taught that, that the plurality there was not the Trinity, that it was the, divine council. I think it's multi-layered. I think it's both. And I think that we can carry that forward to other things in scripture. Like, I think you're right. I think that these hieroglyphs also, they were showing preeminence, but at the same time they were still huge. I mean, that's so it can be both and instead of an either or.
I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that we, all these megalithic structures, all these things that we can't figure out how it was made or whatever the case. I mean, come on. Again, everything being black and white. At this point, I'm convinced that mainstream, it's on purpose why they're not recognizing this. Because then, again, to go back to what I was saying earlier, we're on the biblical
Along,
timeline.
yep,
So it can't be this and this and this and this. Because if you start going down those holes, of course you got to explain where they came from, sons of God, God and stuff. So they can't. And obviously that goes into the UAP and the mark of the beast and all that stuff. Is like it's all related, but they can't come out and say it. So they have to just keep us guessing. Which why are we still honestly, why are we still giving them the time of day? We know it was giants who made all this stuff, man.
well, yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I'm doing a deep dive right now in about science, but it's going to apply to other things too. There's two streams of science. People say trust the science. There's been two streams of science. One that's more of a Nikola Tesla stream, which is more Rosicrucians and more like what you're saying, long game type stuff. And then there's like another science, which was more Einstein and some other ones that were actually people who were looking for truth and true science and pure science. You have that in all these different areas, and then you throw all that in a cauldron and it's all mixed up and you don't know what's what and all that. So that's the long game. You have to put truth in there, but you can put enough disinformation in there to make it not true anymore.
You just mentioned Tesla. So I was kind of like what you were just saying. I started, I got to bounce back and forth between David and, other things because that's so deep.
Yeah.
But I started to do, because science is all about Job 38, like completely. And I started to do a
What's
dive.
Job 38? Refresh us what that is
Yes.
for our audience.
So Job 38, everyone that has not, please read it because in Job, everyone knows Job, but Job
Right.
38 is when God gets tired of everybody running their mouth and God kicks them in the butt kind of thing, which we all need it.
Does with
It's a
truth.
it's a great
Absolutely.
thing.
Yeah.
But my research again is between the lines. So don't read what he's saying. So he talks about Pallades, Orion, the bear, but he doesn't just talk about them, talks about what they do, right? Do you bind the chains of Orion, meaning that when they're not bound, they're loose? What do they do when they're loose, right? Do you guide the bear and its sons, which is the Orthodox Jewish? In King James, it's the Arcturus and its children. Well, the Arcturus star is an actual star, and in its own constellation, there's 54 stars. So that's the suns. So I'm like, okay, all right, let me see how far I can take this thing. So I started going, and the World's Fairs. I don't know how much you guys looked into the World's Fairs and how crazy that stuff is, but the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago, they took uh, free energy off of the Arcturus star. Four different uh, observatories lined up when the Arcturus star was crossed through, and they got free energy and lit up the lights and stuff for the World's Fair, and it was like a whole look what we can kind of do thing. But was it? right? Was it like, how did they know? How did they track? How did they know that they could do that from this star? And then you go back through Arcturus star and mythology with that, and how that's been a part of Mesopotamia and in all Babylon and all their stuff.
Hmm.
And then zodiacs and constellations, which is very early in my research. Obviously, that stuff's alive because God talks about the morning stars singing and all that. But it's His counsel, and it's what this Earth and our oxygen and our gravity. It doesn't just like happen. So and that's what Job 38 is basically the string theory, how everything's connected, how everything works. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, and then yeah, I go down this rabbit hole of like the Columbia thing and Arcturus star and free energy. It's like, what is going on here, man?
Yeah, it goes back to and this is a rabbit. I'm gonna shoot it in a second here.
Right.
Yeah, science. Most of our science is comes from alchemy, and so a lot of people don't realize that. I tell people 200 years ago we were bloodletting people, and that was say trust the science. So, let's let's let's
Speaking of roots in alchemy, did you guys see that physicists at the Large Hadron Collider turned lead into gold?
no, no,
Like that
no,
is the like the dream of alchemy is to
yeah,
transmute lead into gold. Well, they did it.
they did it.
They did it inadvertently. They did it by accident, apparently, but it has been done. So it's interesting that you bring that up, especially in light of recent news.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, do you see about the orb? A buddy of mine sent it to me. They found an orb, 4.5 inch, like steel or whatever
Is this the one in
material
Colombia?
in Colombia. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I looked at this thing. I'm going to give you some perspective as a sculptor. It looks sand cast to me.
So here's my thing. Again, between the lines, they found it in Colombia, right? World's fairs were the Columbia festivals. I think it's again
Oh, so
everything's
like tying it together symbolically, you mean? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean,
because none
That's
of
an
this
interesting
is
thread to
like
pull that.
it's not alien technology. There's nothing crazy coming from another planet. If I'm wrong, that's cool. I can be wrong. It's just all like I feel like it's crazy deception now. They
Yeah, it's
constantly.
part of a greater construct. Speaking to what you were talking about before, symbols, signs, icons, logos, things cast down through the ages, and you can kind of pick at those threads and find patterns. I think sometimes there's noise, but sometimes there are definitely patterns.
Mhm,
This
mhm.
thing to me looks like it's a sandcast fake because I've got some experience with that. If you look at the quality of the shapes, which almost looks like if I'm remembering this correctly, it almost looks like a biohazard symbol, and it's got some kind of goofy CPU looking thing in the middle and a bunch of script around it, like it's some form of Elvish. I can't read it. It's the language of Mordor, which I don't, it looks bogus.
Well,
yeah.
It looks
well,
exactly
that
like somebody with sci-fi fever dream would cook up, and then they sandcast it in their backyard.
well they get a
That's my
once
hot
over
take.
on it, and they go, well, it looks like it's a Mesopotamian writing. It's like, oh, well,
Okay.
there's your tell. There's your tell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Right. Yep.
okay, okay.
Well, I mean, and that's the big thing. That's what going back to what I was talking about earlier is it's the big cauldron, and there's truth in there, but there's a lot of fake, and
There's a lot
that's
of
how
fake in
they
there. Yeah.
the disinformation and psyops. We won't go there. Shoot that rabbit.
Awfully convenient that people are getting they're like wrapped up in this though. Like they're it's these aliens. There's aliens out there, and they're buying it. They're sucking it up when really it's the false powers of dark evil spiritual forces that are at play that are
Yes.
the same forces that have been at play for millennia.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of them too. I think sometimes they're directly involved. These forces, obviously,
Yeah.
but then sometimes it's just they wound the clock back thousands of years ago before the flood, and with all the knowledge, the Promethean knowledge that they gave us, and we're still playing that out. So you know, anyway, well, let's. I'd like to dive into the mighty men while we're here, and just talk a little bit about that. So give us just a brief overview of your research, what you've done, and what you've dug up, and some interesting tidbits that you found in your studying of the mighty men for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the story of David, it kind of best picks up from Goliath. He was a young guy. He gets ordained. He goes and kills Goliath, and that's where it really, really picks up. Um, he spends the rest of First Samuel, all of Second Samuel, pretty much running from Saul, and then eventually from his two kids. But in that, he initially wins favor from Saul when he first kills Goliath, and Saul gives him charge over 1,000 men. And that's where he gets his first initial council, which are super wild dudes. I'm getting ready to do another video on those guys. And he does so good, Saul can't handle it. And that's where Saul kills his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Saul gives him charge, and he's just kicking butt. And Saul's like, oh, embarrassed, can't handle it. So now he wants to kill him. So that's when he bounces through the lands. He goes to Gath. He doesn't stay very long. He goes to Moab, stays a while, gets a bunch of people, goes back to Gath. So he's bouncing around. While he was in Gath that second time, he was given the land of Ziklag. And we already know Ziklag was crazy area, Moabites, Ammonites, Amalekite kind of thing. So he's just accruing these motley crew of giants and hybrids and whatnot. And then eventually he gets named King of Judah, and then he gets named King of Israel. And at that point, he's got this nuts army.
Lion men. Okay, that's a cryptid that I've
Yeah.
heard of in the ether, so to speak. Talk a little bit about that. He had lion men. All right,
Yep.
explain that to me.
Yep. So that's a great way to start off, and that's super interesting one. So at face value, lion men are lion men of Moab. That's where it kind of comes from, which is Lot and his kids. The ancestral relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But David's lion men were Gadites from the tribe of Gad.
Yeah.
Lion, the 12 tribes. So that means that Gad intermarried with Moabites and then kept the lion men going. Every reference, Moabite or Gadite, is lion faced and swift as roes in the mountains, which are like goats, mountain goats kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not full, lion face, lion head, whatever the case, and like obviously bigger in stature and very fast and very swift as a roe in a mountain is very graceful too, because where that comes from. So when he was given the land of Ziklag, that's where he got his second garrison, which was just some wild dudes and 11 Gadite warriors with faces of lions. So his the rest of those guys, think about it. You already right off the bat, you got 11 lion-faced warriors. Then you've got people from Gibeah. You got Gibeah. I don't know if you're familiar with the children of Belial.
I've
Belial,
heard,
yeah.
but I don't know what it is. Go ahead.
It's crazy because, like, here's a great example. The sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. But the man that shall touch them must be fenced with iron and the staff of a spear, and they shall be utterly burned with fire in the same place. That's if you touch one of these people. Like, if you try to go capture them, you're in trouble, and you're plagued or infected or whatever the case.
Interesting.
I don't like to take non-canonical, but Belial is in the Dead Sea Scrolls as a demon, and it's also in the secret book of John.
In the New Testament too, right? Isn't it? In Belial and
It does in Corinthians one time Jesus references Belial. Yeah, so it is an evil spirit.
It's in Deuteronomy 13 as well. Yeah, Deuteronomy 13.
yeah,
13.
okay, yeah.
Which is crazy too, because I don't put any energy into like the evil stuff, but that's a whole council and a whole army of its own too, and you can kind of just see more patterns of that.
Well, let me ask you something. Do you think, and I am pro supernatural totally, but I almost wonder if part of the whole supernatural aspect, but also could have included some kind of genetic defect with these lion men. I think of
Yes.
when I was a kid, there was this movie about a guy named Rocky, and he was redheaded, and it was called Mask. Yeah,
Yeah.
and he had a genetic defect that gave him an interesting looking face. I wonder, and I'm not playing the skeptic at all, but I wonder if it could have been a factor as well with some of these and they genetically passed it through maybe inbreeding or something like that.
Yeah. I like to attack it real, just like us three are sitting
Yeah.
here in this room.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that I would probably say 5% is pure genealogy.
Yeah.
That is just the power of God and
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
he, because how do you make something that's not going to need you in 200 years? You know what I mean? It has to have a natural evolution, and that word has been tainted because of modern times. But there is a natural evolution. It has to be everything, right? So
Right.
I think a good portion of it, and I'm getting ready to go into that, is the genealogy. Now, Genesis 6, we know that, but then 1 Corinthians 11:10 says women need to have power over their heads because of the angels. So I
Right.
see, so that's basically angels were still coming down and taking wives and doing all that. That absolutely is still happening now. And I say that because that has everything to do with their goal.
Right.
They're never going to not want to kill us and take domain over the earth. Like that's never going to change. So that's always going to be a factor. But it is so Lot was single all the way up until Sodom. He didn't meet his wife until Sodom. That's the first time that he's referenced as in having a family. And we know what happened when they left Sodom. His wife turns around. A, she turns around and becomes a pillar of salt. B, she's never actually named. And that's significant because when you don't get in, but you're part of the story, there's a reason for that. It wasn't like no accidents in writing the Bible.
Yeah.
That means that her genealogy was tainted. Also, when the angels were there and the people did what they did to the angels and said what they said, it said they blinded all the small and the great. Now in Hebrew, that's Katan and Gadol, meaning all the small people and all the people of great size. Blinded them
That's
all.
interesting. Wow.
So that puts Nephilim there in Sodom. And then, of course, everything I just said. So then his daughters have incest with him. That was a stressor to kick off a spike in genealogy. Now, I don't know, who am I, but atavism is something that I found is a scientific trait. 2025, it still happens, where you can hold stuff in your DNA and nothing ever happens, or something happens and there's red hair all of a sudden, or the there's a small person or a huge person, or you grow a tail. Like that is scientific.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it is all always under a certain stressor. So I would argue that incest, especially, you got to have all the clues if you're going to argue something, right? There weren't that many people on the planet back then. So the gene
Yeah.
pool was not like it is now. So I would argue that if you had incest back then, it probably did mess some stuff up really bad. Where now it wouldn't be as bad, but it's still incest is horrible, and we know why. So that is where lion men come from. Well, lion
Mm.
faced is from Moab, but then again, it's referenced in different parts and different areas, and of course outside of the Bible too. That's a big thing is lion men.
Yeah.
I would argue that that's you know something else too to go back to the you know devil's advocate. We don't know what our reproductive stuff would with what animals it would work with because like you know what I mean, where
Yeah.
that's disgusting to even say it. But everything was made from the same, it made at the same factory, right?
Yeah.
So it says in the Bible multiple times to not have sex with animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's like a overarching theme of God saying like, here's the bounds, these are the confines, these are the boundaries, here's the banks of the river, here's the fireplace. You want to keep the fire in the fireplace, keep the water in the river, keep things within the bounds that I've established. And any transgression of those boundaries in the form of illicit relations with other animals or with other people that God has specifically said do not have anything to do with them. Those are all very clearly transgressions of those boundaries, and they always result in decidedly negative outcomes.
Right.
So you've got the fallen angels who cohabitate with human women, as with Genesis 6:3 and 4, sons of God, so the daughters of men. They were fair to was, and they chose. We all talk about this, verse in church, but then we go right past it, and some people think, oh, it's the Sethites having, or whatever. There's this whole other
Yeah.
means of like understanding that I fundamentally disagree with, but it is inherently like a message about transgressing boundaries. They kept not their first estate, and they are reserved in everlasting chains for eternal judgment. Like these angels did the wrong thing, and it resulted in offspring that were horrifying to behold, whether they were 20 feet tall or 65 feet or 130 feet or whatever.
Yeah.
Whether they had lion faces or whatever. There's a greater story of transgression of boundaries, I think. And then that same kind of thing, to your point earlier, Adam, it still happens today.
Yes.
It's the same story. It's the same story, and we're living in it. And yet it's being, I think that it's being largely covered up by people who have other motives,
Yeah.
People that don't want the truth to come out, people that actively despise and hate God. Even people, I would argue, within the church itself have covered this stuff up
Yes.
in the name of some adherence to science. It became popular in really, especially I think the late 1800s. People were like, oh, well, we're going to think about this scientifically because I can't believe that God would have parted the Red Sea, so it must have been a naturally occurring event, and we're just going to explain it through natural means instead of allowing for the supernatural. We have subsumed it with the idea that everything has to have a natural explanation. Now, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm just kind of diatribbing here, but just hang with me for a second. So we've got this transgression of the created order that results in these giants, some of whom are these like the mighty men? Are they like the gibborim? Are they like, did they become these other things effectively? Or were they genetically these things? Or are you saying that, that these characteristics arose in them through some latent DNA in the form of atavism?
Yeah. So gibborim, mighty men, and Nephilim is kind of synonymous in a lot of different ways. Stature is like the biggest thing, and you can look at that through the entire Bible. Everything, they were sitting in high places. They were burning incense in the high places. Saul was picked because he was tall. He specifically was a goodly man, which does not mean good. It means because he was shoulders to height taller than
Yeah,
everybody
he's a
in the
big
land.
dude.
Mm-hmm.
He's a big guy. Yeah.
And one of so David married 6 wives in Hebron. Hebron used to be Kirith Arba before they conquered it, the land of Arba, the father of Anak. So one of David's sons from Hebron is a goodly man as well. So that's what got in the gene pool in the very beginning was the height, and I think that's what led to. And I think also too, I mean, there's no exception to the rules. Like Moabites are from Nephilim, but not that close because it's tainted DNA that got messed up in incest. The way I look at it. Whereas most of the mighty men are direct from that specific genealogy. It's man, the wonder of God, the way he works and what we don't know about how we operate, that's probably one of those things that just constantly is sparking. And once you introduce something different, it goes in this direction. Like Absalom, they put in the story about his hair.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that is traces from Ruth, the Moabitess. And that's kind of like why that story is there and why it's so important, because it's not only establishing Ruth and what she did, it's also establishing the Moabitess line in that genealogy. So you know what I mean? So it's like
covering.
Just sparking like the sons of Zariah, David's nephews, his sister. So after Goliath, Jesse has 2 daughters. In Chronicles, Zariah's listed and her sons are listed, and then Abigail and the father and their children are listed. See what I'm saying? So there's no dad there, not even mentioned with Zariah. Doesn't even say, well, it was this dude and blah. Nothing. So that means that it wasn't human, right? By the standards that have already been set.
Right.
So then so then when you look at Joab, Abiyashi, and Ashael, like they're all doing crazy things. Ashael is super fast. Abiyashi is very strong, and then Joab is very strong and very big. So you know what I mean. So it just keeps sparking and changing and going. Like Joab, I love mentioning this was when he kills Absalom, he took 3 spears in one hand. That's a scale. Whoever wrote that put a scale for reference for us because why else would you grab 3? You know, you're not going to be super articulate with 3 spears in one hand. That's going to be like super messy. That's a scale. He had a big hand.
Yeah. They didn't have a word for diameter, like to Brandon's earlier point. Like, so that like it was 3 spears. Yeah, the bro's got a giant mitt,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that you see so many different examples of a scale You know, they mentioned something
Yeah.
just for scale, and
Yeah.
and goes back to my point, where it's like height, stature, high places, big thing. Why?
Yeah. It's important. Yeah. And I want to caveat this is I believe a lot of this is the supernatural. However, like before the flood, I don't really think that the angels came down and they got petri dishes and had lab equipment and made, I mean, it's almost like some people out there imagine that's I think they did the good old fashioned way. They bred, like, you breed dogs, you breed goats, you do it. That's how they did their genetic modifications, but it was still supernatural. Number one, because they were from another spiritual realm, and number two, it had supernatural aspects of it. It was not natural. And and I almost wonder sometimes too, if the whole connotation, if we misunderstand the word righteous, because it's used several times in the Old Testament, not about moral behavior, but about purity of your genealogy and your lineage. And I mean, that's just a rabbit hole that I'd love to explore one of these days.
That's one of the more fascinating topics, I think, really. And one of the things that's always really fascinated me is that Noah was pure in his generations, right?
Yep. Yep.
So
That's the
God
beginning.
chose him because, yeah, this is a guy that hasn't been corrupted by all the manipulation on the part of these fallen angels.
Hmm.
He's the guy, you know.
But his son,
Yeah.
his genealogy, Ham was carrying dirty genealogy. And you can tell because the one person wrote the first 5 books. So you can see that they were hinting at stuff through that.
Right.
Before Ham even does what he does, he's called the father of Canaan. He
Mm,
hasn't had
Yeah.
kids yet, and he has not done it yet. But he's, Genesis 19, he's referenced as father of Canaan.
right.
Genesis 19, Genesis 20. Then 25 is when he actually sins. That was
Mm,
a heads up. This is where it came from. All the bad stuff.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. The curse proceeded through him.
Well, and you were talking earlier about it. I wanted to bring this up because this is a fascinating case. I would love to do a podcast on this. There is a group of people, and Ron probably knows their name because he's so much better with details than I am. There is a group of people in, I think, I want to say on the East Coast, Appalachia, that were inbred and they turned blue. Are y'all familiar with these people? They are blue.
Not
Yeah.
blue.
That's
There's a name is famous, the Whitakers.
the blue fugates. Yeah.
The who?
The blue fugates. So there's probably several families that have this problem. They had a blood problem, and it's got, I forget the name of it, but it's kind of like, have you heard of the stuff that everybody's taking these days called methylene blue? It's like a blue dye. But it has like meth in the name of it. It's meth something,
Of
What the
course.
disease is?
but it
Okay.
relates to the color of the skin.
And they're not just
Right.
blue like when you turn blue when you're like choking blue. I mean, they're like literally like the guy behind you on your wall blue. I mean, it's
Blue
like,
tint.
well, almost what's the race in Star Trek, the one with the
I
antennas,
was thinking of the Smurfs.
and well, I'm a Trekkie. I'm thinking about Andorian. So yeah,
Let's
but
see if I can
Yeah,
look
yeah.
this up.
yeah, but I mean that just shows you that supernatural type things happen naturally. There's this overlap, Venn diagram
Here
of
it is. Methemoglobinemia. Or something like that.
methyloglobinemia.
Methemoglobinemia.
Well, methyl's blue, and so methyl. Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. And I'm not trying to naturalize supernatural things. I just think it's a natural thing. I think that's one of the reasons why, because I always wondered as a kid, why did they have to kill the animals when they went into Canaan? Well, two reasons I've found out. One could be lycanthropy, which is a mind blowing thing, a skinwalker slash whatever. The second is just because, and this has just come out recently, and this is a little TMI, but I want to put it out here that they found out that women who have been promiscuous still have the sperm of men for a long time.
I've heard that too.
Yeah,
That when I wrote Five Stones, I wanted to tackle the Amalekite thing because of that. Because you hear a lot of, why do these people gotta die, and why was this ordered, and why is that? As a kid, growing up in the church, I used to hear the intermarriage thing, and it
yeah,
was like, well, how? I always kind of questioned that myself. Was like, why would God not be okay with? We're humans. What is it? If
Right.
you love somebody,
Right.
you love somebody. What does it matter? Well, he's clearly not talking about human. I would argue that if you went to DMV back then in BC times, it wouldn't be Caucasian. It would be human, Moabite, Jebusite.
Well, that's interesting.
I just
Yeah.
I love
It,
this mental imagery of the DMV in the BC.
dude. Yeah.
That's
So
such a great word picture there.
right.
Those
In
little men in black.
dude. So Abram gets told that he's gonna be over Goy Gadol, nations of great size. He's gonna be
Yeah.
given the promised land, and then these are the tribes that are there that have to go. So then you go through Numbers, and we find out the tribes and all that stuff, and then you just keep on going. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Ezra is about the exile. Everybody that got taken and taken to Babylon, but it lists everybody that intermarried with Amorites, Jebusites, Girgashites, and the same people already mentioned that were bad. Then you get
Right.
into Nehemiah, beautiful book, but it lists them by name of who in the temple, because in the temple you had roles, you had jobs, and it would
Right.
list who of those guys intermarried with the bad people. And then you get to Esther and Haman. Haman wants to kill all the Jews and whatnot. He is a Agagite. Well, in the Orthodox Jewish version, there's a note to Numbers 24:7, where it's referencing the Amalekites being one of the First Nations. So that's why King Agag had to die or had to go, and the Amalekites, because they were not human, they were pretty close to Nephilim genes and whatnot, and they were cannibals and they were lickers of
Yeah.
blood.
Vampires.
But it kept going to the fact that Haman, way on down into this book later on, is still trying to kill all the Jewish and the Israelites. So it's like that's why. That's why God didn't have a problem with people intermarrying. People intermarrying the bad guys. And why did the bad guys have to go? Because they were horrible, they weren't human, and they were killing humans. So it's like, all
Mm.
right, I made humans, I gave them the world, and now you're down there killing them. Well, I can't have that. That ain't gonna work. And also, I heard this thing about pork, where the reason that God is saying can't eat pork is because Amalekites made pigs from boars, and it was cross pollinated. So it was
Interesting.
like some of these animals I didn't make. And then also too, if they ingest blood, we're not supposed to eat them. Why? Because the coagulates in blood, it's alive. And that's another way that we can change, I think, too.
Yeah, well, you opened the door for this for me because I was going to go here. Something, Adam, in your research going forward, and I'm not trying to be a know-it-all, but I just want to interject this. But something that I think is fascinating. I love neuroscience and I love quantum physics, and one of the big things I've been learning about is something called epigenetics. It's basically where our behavior and our emotions and all that kind of stuff can flip switches on our genes. So you could have two twins and both have the gene for alcoholism, and one of them become an alcoholic and the other one not because one of them switch was flipped, or stuff like that. I just wonder if the gibborim, if that was Nimrod's, it was Nimrod, yeah, that he became a gibborim. If that was what it was through the unrighteous acts and rituals and the occultic things that he did that flipped his switch to make him a Nephilim.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's really an interesting kind of dive into epigenetics there, like an angle to get into it. Really, I guess, like the notion that this guy had latent DNA and was triggered to become something else. This is fascinating.
Hulk.
Fascinating kind of take, because it is very much like, yeah, the Hulk. It's very much like some of these narratives we're talking about, where someone has superhuman powers. They're beyond the scope of the created order of humanity, and then
Yes.
they flip a switch and suddenly they're the big green man smashing stuff.
Well, Othniel, the first judge of Israel, like,
Yeah.
yo.
Yeah.
So that story is crazy. So Othniel is the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb. Caleb in Hebrew means dog or unsophisticated servant, like rough person kind of thing. Kenaz means hunter or trapper. Kenaz is a Kenizzite. Kenizzite
Mm-hmm.
is one of those tribes from the Promised Land that had to go.
Right.
Loosely translated, that is hunter of men, because it's to be translated as not hunter, but like a job, a role kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then Othniel translated is violent lion of God.
Oh God, yeah.
And then, again, everything's arguable, whatever the case.
Right. But that, yeah. Names
But
matter.
he was chosen as and he was not only was he chosen as the first judge. Read about how he was chosen. It wasn't just like, all right, who wants to do it? Israel fell back under rule from a bad king, like an 8-year rule. In Israel, again, oh, please God, please help us. And it says that God gave them Othniel. He was already there. He was a dude. He was already part of the job or the team. The Spirit came upon him because he was, he could use him. He was built differently. And then he gave him extra strength where it mattered. And he by himself took care of that king. And there's I want to say 3 or 4 mentions like that where that person went and took care of the town or the king himself.
Mm-hmm.
We don't look at that enough. They're meaning that one person went in there and subdued a whole army. Like that's huge. That's huge. So Othniel, we could argue that he wasn't a total human, but was being used for his strength to keep Israel safe. And that goes to what you were talking about with Nimrod. Is in the Living Bible version, Nimrod is mentioned as the first king. Doesn't say anything about being a hunter. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the line or where the Nephilim went eventually. Because you look at Ezekiel 28, the king of Tyre is referenced as being a former guarding cherub in the garden. Used to be an angel, and now you're down here and you're getting rich of all this knowledge. So that's 2 people that off the bat were kings. But then you look at what God says. You don't need a king. You don't need a king. I'll give you guards. You don't need a king. If you get a king, you're going to be governed like the other nations. And then look where we are now. Get taxed out the wazoo on everything. So it's like, you know what I mean? It Nephilim line. That's how they keep here. Why they're in control. Why God was specific of you don't need this because it's bad, and then how he was you know, using people for different purposes.
All right. We probably need to start landing this plane, but I want to give Ron a chance to. You have anything, Ron?
I do have one question for you, and that is, how do you think modern society, I use this term like loosely in the sense that we understand we're a part of the biblical continuum, all right? How do you
Right.
think modern society can actually relate to the ancient stories of giants from the Bible and divine beings and things like that? If I'm Joe Sixpack on the street, like it feels very much to me like your attempt is to make this accessible through the conduit of like Five Stones and the comic efforts that you've kind of like been employing. But like, how do you think modern society can relate to this? What are the best means by which we can access people and get these stories to them in a way that they can digest it, understand, and see themselves as a part of that continuum?
Absolutely. Very early, it was, well, how could I reach me? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're going to, I hate to say the word business because it's not a business, but it's the same mindset of like your
Sure.
demographic. How do you set
Sure.
your demographic? Who are you going to talk to? Moses had to figure out his voice, right? And how he could do what he could do. So that was a big thing to me was I'm not the guy to do a children's book. I would, and I would do it the best I could do, but I got to feel who I am. So the way to attack me is to give me the facts. Let me
Yeah.
build the relationship. Just give me the facts. And also too, I can smell BS a mile away, and there's millions of people like, yeah,
Yeah.
don't come at me, well, and then there's a metaphysical. No, 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 no. I want the sheer facts. So that's exactly what Five Stones is my job as an author was to not worry about the reader and their heart and their path. My job, and it took 3 years to figure this out. My job was literally just to get it out and to talk about it.
Yeah.
You like it,
I
you
love
hate
it.
it, you think I stink, it's all good, doesn't matter.
I love that like really cut and dried approach. You're just like, this is the thing, and take it or leave it, and this is how. That's great because it allows people the freedom to be able to make decisions for themselves, and you're not like babying them or spoon feeding them in a way that's insulting to their intelligence.
It was
That's
very
a great
Jesus.
approach. Yeah.
Very Jesus. If you look at Jesus' method, very
Yeah.
Jesus.
So
Appreciate
like
that.
in conjunction with that, like what impact do you hope that your ability to put this out there like that is going to have on people's understanding of biblical narratives?
Yes, I I love, I've had some feedback and it's great. Success to me is when people say, "Oh, I didn't even think about it like that. Let me go back and look." Because Dr. Randall Smith says it perfectly. Whatever irritates you the most is your calling. I hate
That's
Wow.
interesting.
I hate
Wow.
misconceptions. Don't blame me for something I didn't do. In the working world,
Write that down.
I know my
Yeah.
numbers. Don't tell me how my warehouse is doing. I know. So for anybody, for one person to just say, you know what, that doesn't sound right. Let me go back and look. I can check it off as a success because we all in this world agree that the Bible has been misinterpreted. I'm not a New Testament guy. Like I'm learning, and that's my spiritual journey. Like that's not my role. Until it is, it's not my role. My role is Old Testament, which is spiritual archaeology, like you said earlier, which is awesome because I'm a why guy. Why did it happen? Why do we have to do this? You want me to do this? Why? Why? I'll do it if it makes sense. So yes, if for nothing else people think, well, that's a little different. Let me go back and look. That's it. That's a game
Great.
changer for me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I love your foray into the world of narrative story, storytelling and like artwork employed to get people to ask those questions, to sort of like unpack and reconsider and think about these narratives that are very much based in truth and reality, perhaps in a different way than they've considered it before.
Yes.
Yep. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do.
All right. I hope this is a brief question, but might not be. But I've been dying to know this through the whole podcast. Are there good giants? What's your opinion
Mhm,
on that?
mhm. Oh, absolutely. So Obed Edom. Obed
Okay.
Edom, Ornan, the Jebusite. I would argue,
The mighty men.
David's final garrison, the
Yeah.
final guys. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Ornan, and I'll make it super quick. So Ornan and Obed Edom are the best examples because look at the trust that was given to those guys. They left the ark with Obed Edom, and Obed
Yeah.
Edom not only is a Gittite, he is part of the Shoarim, which is a genealogically tracked role in the temple, the gatekeepers or the porters, bodyguards. So these are giants that they can trust. And then Ornan, when the plague stopped at the threshing floor of Ornan, he's a giant, but he has a threshing floor. He's not growing cattle. He's not growing sheep. He's not a meat eater. Well, we don't know that, but you know the point I'm meaning. I'm
Yeah.
saying is
Yeah.
he's domestic. He's a threshing floor. He's just a chill, normal guy, and he also argues with David. No, I'll. He was trying to give it to him, and David argued, "I'll buy it from you," meaning he was respected. So yeah, that's what's so crazy about this whole thing is no matter who you are, you can give your heart to God and you'll be all right. You know what I mean?
That's a good takeaway, honestly. That's a great takeaway because I've sat through myriad of debates of if you're tainted, can you go to heaven and da 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 da. Da. When you just kind of laid it out, so that's something. I think that's a topic we can go deeper into at later times or whatever. But I still think that's really fascinating that God's redemption is wide. So, all right. The question we ask all our first time guests when they're on is, and this is usually after you've been born again, is kind of our criteria for this. So, what's the most supernatural thing you've ever seen, Adam?
Man, all right. So I mentioned the trumpet, which was nuts,
Yeah,
right?
you
Like
didn't go into a
as a
lot of detail though. You didn't go into a lot of. Was it a real trumpet that you heard,
well,
or
I,
was
I
it?
heard I heard
Oh, okay. I thought you were using an analogy. I'm sorry.
no, no,
Yeah,
it was like a war horn. Like it was
Wow.
yes, it to my core. Anytime in the Bible, people when they meet an angel or whatever, they
Yeah.
just drop to their
Yeah.
knees. They didn't do that just because they wanted to be nice. That was a involuntary response. I huddled up. I mean, I felt it to my core, dude. Chills. And that told me, write this book, get this book out. But I'm gonna tell you something else crazy too. When I was a preteen, I was a 15, 16. Well, so that wasn't preteen. I was teen. I was almost driving. Yeah, I was good. I was bad. I was rebellious, whatever the case, blah, blah. Well, at one of the church retreats, me and a buddy were sitting at a table by ourselves. We were the, bad kids, whatever. The pastor and the deacon people all came and sat at our table. We thought we were in trouble. Like, what do we do? What do we do? And pastor's right beside me. And he had a cool ring, like a Native American feathers and, turquoise and stuff. And I said, man, that's a cool ring, man. He's like, yeah, thank you. I'm sitting there eating. The next thing I know, he takes it off and puts it in front of me. He's like, wow, God told me to give it to you. So it was like, what am I supposed to do, man? Well, I don't know. So yeah, so I've seen it, and I've in church Pentecostal, I've seen the speaking in tongues and then the translation.
Yeah.
I saw one time, somebody stood up, gave the message, eerily calm, quiet. Somebody stood up and started talking, and the pastor was like, sit down, and was like, go get him. And people went, and it was like a bad message. It was like a evil spirit kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Counterfeiting, probably. Yeah. I've seen that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, Adam. Man, I've enjoyed this, and there's just so much, and as you dig deeper, I'd love to have you back on maybe, and keep tabs on your research and what's going on too, particularly if you release any more books or any more. I don't know, what do you call that, a book or a graphic novel? I mean, what's the terminology for that?
Technically graphic novel, but I'm a simple guy. Comic book is just easier to say it.
Yeah. I mean, I still have my comics from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that people will be hoarding Adam's works as well. And speaking of your works, can you tell us where we can get access to see more of your stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your deets.
fivestones.bigcartel.com is e-commerce for my book. I've got a YouTube page that I've got some cool videos on, deeper blogs, stuff that's longer for Substack. So YouTube is E. Adam Farris. eadamfarris.substack.com are my small writings, real quick writings. I just take a topic and dive deep into it. I'm super accessible guy. Just holler at me.
Okay.
Nice.
Any other? Are you on Facebook or IG or anything like that?
That's the one I was sitting to think, man, I'm forgetting something. Instagram. I'm on Instagram, E. Adam Farris.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to put that in the show notes, and I'm sure you're going to have some people reach out to you, man. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. I appreciate you taking your time to come on the show. And Ron, thank you for coming. You bring a slant that is really interesting. So it's awesome.
I appreciate it, man. Adam, it's great meeting you. Enjoyed certainly looking at your work and reading up on some of the things you're up to. Keep up the good work. Really appreciate your efforts to spread messages that matter to the community at large.
I appreciate that. It means a lot.
It ultimately it comes back to the gospel, and you're doing that. So cool. All right.
Appreciate that, fellas.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.